Good. All right, with Hashem's help, we will learn today Yevamos Daf Chav Tes, which is also the 28th Daf. Koyach, again, we start with Daf Beis. We left off yesterday Chav Ches Amud Beis by the Mishnah, and this Mishnah is going to introduce us not to a new case, but to a new opinion on the case that we have been learning for a while. We have been learning about the din of Achois Zikukasei, 3 brothers, 4 brothers, or more. 2 brothers married 2 sisters and both passed away, so there are 2 sisters that fall into Yibum. And until now we have been learning that the prohibition of Achois Zikukasei is midrabanan, and this Mishnah will introduce us to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who holds that Achois Zikukasei is an Isur Da'iraisa, and therefore, as we have been learning until now, according to Rabbi Shimon, not only are the brothers not allowed to do Yibum with neither of the widows, but they don't even have to do Chalitza. Wherever Hashem says something should not be done, then not even Chalitza is needed. Let's read it inside.
So is he adding to the first 15?
No. I'll tell you why. Because there's no Isur Kares, and therefore it doesn't go on the Tzara. It's for sure not an Eva. Exactly. Says the Mishnah, Shloisha Achim, again, 3 brothers or more. And Shnai Yemehem Nusoim Shtei Achoyos, and 2 brothers were married to 2 sisters. And now the Mishnah makes it clear, it doesn't have to be always the 2 sisters. 2 sisters is normally given as a more common, more real example. It can be one married a mother, one married a daughter. One married the grandmother, one married the granddaughter. In other words, one brother is married to a woman who has a relative that's connected with the kinship of Erva who married the other brother. Oisha ubita, Oisha ubas bita, Oisha ubas bina. And both brothers passed away, and both of these women fall to Yibum. So we have been learning until now, repeats the Mishnah the Din, that Choltzois, Harei Elu Choltzois V'loi Misyavamos, that both sisters need from the one brother, from the 2 brothers, both of them can only have Chalitza performed to them. Midrabanan comes along Rabbi Shimon, and he says, Poiter, you don't even need Chalitza. As the Gemara is going to bring the pasuk, we learned this once before. We mentioned this Rabbi Shimon, but this is the source of this Rabbi Shimon, that Achois Zikukasei is prohibited by Torah law. And continues the Mishnah. Hoisa achas mehem os asura olav isur erva. If only one was prohibited on the living brother, on the Yavam as an erva, but his other brother's widow is mutter on him, so then asur, obviously the one who is an erva is asur, and therefore no yibum nor chalitza needed, but the other sister will be mutter, both in yibum and in chalitza. However, if isur mitzvah or isur kedusha, if there is an isur not of erva, but either mitzvah, our Mishnah understands that to be a shniya, a rabbinic erva, or a isur kedusha, or a lav she'ein by kares. Not the case of tzara, where there's a pasuk of Rab Shimon, but other scenarios. In other words, mido'iraisa yibum would be allowed. So even though we don't do yibum, even according to Rab Shimon, choltzos v'loi misyavmois. So let's start with the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Tanya, Rab Shimon, Poiter b'shteyem. We learned in the Braisa, repeating the din of our Mishnah, that according to Rab Shimon, Achois Zikukasei, both sisters will be exempt even from Chalitza and certainly from Yibum. Where does he learn it from? Shenemar. When it says, V'isha el achoisa loi sikach litzroir, so Rab Shimon learns from this pasuk that B'sha'a shenasu tzarei zulazu, when 2 sisters, or like the Mishnah says, a mother and a daughter, whenever 2 ervas become tzaris meaning they fall both to yibum, lo yehei lochal kuchen afilu ba'achas mehen. That's what the Torah means when it says lo yisikach litzroir. Lo yisikach doesn't only mean don't perform yibum; it means you don't even need chalitza.
So he touches Tzaros not as
Real co-wives.
Co-Yevamos.
Yeah, exactly. Then the Mishnah continued, even according to Rab Shimon, if one of these two wives were asur on one brother. The Mishnah gave a case where there were only three brothers, on the brother, as erva. So says the Gemara, Hasulamali, Hainuhach. Of course, if one is asur, so they're not falling as tzaras, so yeah. So you should do, the way the Mishnah says, even Yibum, you could do Yibum even on the sister. So the Gemara says, Rab Shimon itzterech. The Mishnah repeated this because now we quoted Rab Shimon. And Sal Kadai Techamina, one might have thought, Hoyel v'amar Rab Shimon shtei achoyes loy cholzois v'loy misyavamais. Therefore, we would have thought ligzor mishum beis achoyes the alma. If there's going to be two sisters, one of the two sisters, let's say, is the living brother's mother-in-law. People might not know that. What will people witness? That Levi did Yibum with the other Yevama. People might think that always, even when two sisters fall to Yibum, you could marry one of them. And therefore maybe the Chachamim would make a gzeir, at least don't do Yibum to the other one. Kumash Malan, that you can even do Yibum to the other one. Then the final din of the Mishnah was, if one of them was only asad as a shniya, as a mitzvah. And on this the Mishnah says, Cholzais v'loy misyavmois. So ask the Gemara, Daf Chavtes Amud Aleph, Ai v'ha'aman Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon says that when they are erves, when they are sisters, let's say, shtei achoyes, loy cholzos v'loy misyavmois. Why is it that if one of them is prohibited as a isur mitzvah, that over there chalitza is done? Answers the Gemara, Gezeira mishum isur mitzvah da alma. If Rab Shimon would have allowed the din d'oraisa, according to him, of the living brother not even needing to perform chalitza, what will people think? People might not know that they were sisters. People will think that the reason why Rab Shimon says you don't even need chalitza, because one of them was asar anim because of a shniyah midrabanan. And therefore they would think that in other cases, where there are no two sisters issue, stam, if a man had two wives, and he died, and one of his two wives were asar on the living brother as a shniyah, one might have thought that the Yavam doesn't have to do not even chalitza. That's not true. When there's an isur just of mitzvah, even though he cannot perform yibum, but chalitza needs to be performed. So therefore, according to Rab Shimon, being that they're two sisters, according to Rab Shimon, whenever there's a chayzik kasai, each sister is exempt from yibum and chalitza. Why is it that if one of them will also be asur as an isur mitzvah, there Rab Shimon will hold that you need to do chalitza? Because people might not know that they're sisters. They're going to think the exemption of chalitza came from isur mitzvah. Isur mitzvah doesn't exempt chalitza. According to Rab Shimon, only achayzuku kasai exempts chalitza. So it's a gzeira.
It actually holds that if it's achayzuku kasai,
you don't need anything.
No
very good.
But
if one of them is,
but there's also another isur.
That's correct.
What do you call it? Now you got to do chalitza.
That's right. So people shouldn't think that the isur mitzvah is the cause of not needing chalitza. It's a normal rabbinic degree. It says
Chalitza psula according to Rav?
no.
Why? Because chalitza psula is one in which he can only in choletz and not meyavel.
By a chayzik kasei, they're equally both asur midoraisa. They're equally prohibited. The fact that one is also a shni, I don't think it makes it worse. Shni is only midrabanan, they're already asr midoraisa, and you don't even need chalitza. But since one also happens to be a shniya, it's just not to make a confusion. That explains why the one who is an isr mitzvah herself, we wanted chalitza to be performed with her. Don't forget, here we're not speaking about a man with two wives. We're speaking about three brothers. In other words, each one comes from another bias. So that explains why the rabbis would make a decree on her, but why would you demand chalitza on her sister? The sister is only an achayzeku kasai. So you should not need chalitza on her. Answers the Gemara, well, once you need chalitza on one, then the rabbi said, you need to do chalitza on the other. In the words of our Gemara, gezeira achayza mishum lassa. It's an unusual expression. If lassa means her fortune, if lassa means because of her, since the isur mitzvah needs chalitza, so the other one also needs to have chalitza. Good. But when it comes to an erva, what did we just learn in the reisha of the sefer? That if the two sisters One of them is also an Isser Erva, one of them is a mother-in-law. What does Rab Shimon hold? On the Erva, Gurnisht, right? No Yibum and no Chalitza. And on the other one, you can marry. No one is going to say, one second, if you can marry the other one, maybe you can marry the Erva. Why there don't we make the Gzeira? So the Gemara says, listen, when it comes to one sister being an Erva, the Migmar Gemiri law, Inchi, everyone knows that an Erva is automatically exempt even from Chalitza. That's a known din. Therefore, and V'kala Isla, everyone will know she's an Erva. So therefore, we're not afraid that people will confuse one, the wife of one, the Erva of one, with the other one. So therefore, we did not make the Gzeira. But when it comes to two sisters, one of them is only a Shniya, one of them is also only because of Isur Kedusha, whatever that means. People don't know that din that much. So it's not a double Gzeira, but it's like two steps in the same Gzeira. Aleph, whenever there's an Isur Mitzvah, even according to Rab Shimon, do Chalitza. Aisha Zachayze Kukasei, people lav dafke will chap that. They'll think that the Isur Mitzvah itself exempted her from Chalitza, and it doesn't. Because Isur Mitzvah and Isur Kedusha is only problematic rabbinically. Midoraisa Yibum is needed. So therefore you need at least Chalitza. And once you said you need Chalitza with one, in such a case, Rab Shimon will hold you need Chalitza with the other. Good. Weiter. Moving on.
So that's not the Gzeira on it here?
No. It's one's Gzeira. We have this the whole time. Okay. Next Mishnah. Shloisha Achim, 3 brothers. Shnayim Nesuyim Shtei Achayas. 2 of them married 2 sisters. So let's use the names. Reuven and Shimon. Reuven marries Rachel. Shimon marries Leah. And Ve'echad, and the 3rd living brother, Levi Mufna, is a bachelor, is single. Really? Many Rishonim point out, don't forget that Midoraisa, a man is allowed to marry more than one wife. So even if Levi would have been married, he would have been allowed to marry one. The mitzvah of Yibam goes on to him. Okay, so we believe that opened the question, why do we have to emphasize Mufna? Meis echad nibala achayis.
He wouldn't be able to marry both.
Of course not. Yeah, I'm just saying the word mufna is something that has to be dealt with. Meis echad nibala achayis. If let's begin that Reuven passed away first, right? There's no achayis ukukasa yet. There's only one widow, Rachel. And va'asa ba mufna maimer. The whole daf today will be about a maimer. Maimer is, according to most of the Tanoim, a rabbinic inaction, a rabbinic institution of the Yavam who was choosing to perform Yibum. Yibum literally means the act of living together, the relation. He shouldn't right away have a relation with the widow. He should do exactly what we do today in a normal marriage, Kedushin, engagement, halachic engagement, which would be, for example, giving the Yevama a ring, giving her something that has value, according to Beis Hillel, even the value of a pruta, or a shava pruta, and telling her that with this we're becoming engaged, so to say. Now, we're going to clarify in the Gemara later what is Maimer. First of all, there are Tanoim that held Maimer as Midoraisa. Regardless, there's a whole question, how powerful is Maimer? Does Maimer affect a real marriage, a full marriage, at least Midrabanan? Or does Maimer only affect an engagement Midrabanan, and not a marriage? And we'll see in the Gemara today what difference is there between an engagement and a marriage. But let's go to this case. Maimer was done. We're learning the Sugya of Achayze Kokasei. Correct? He did already Maimer with her. And after he did Maimer, then Shimon passed away, leaving Leah as a widow. Leah and Rachel are sisters. All right, let's not go with the Tana of Rabbi Shimon that it's an Isur Midoraisa, but everyone agrees that a Chayzik Kasei, rabbinic law, does not allow you to perform Yibur with neither of the sisters. Here, he already gave Maimer to one. Simple. So what does he do now? So the Gemara says the Mishnah, Beis Shammai hold that Maimer is mamish, a full-fledged connection. We'll see how much in the Gemara. Now that Levi, totally doing something kosher, he did Maimer to Rachel before Leah was also connected to him with Yibum. He gets to keep Rachel, even though he didn't marry her yet. He can go marry her. And Vahalozu and Leah, Teitzei Mishum Achais Isha. Maimer itself, for this din, makes Rachel considered married to Levi. Now that he's married to Rachel, Leah is not Achois Kukasai. Leah is the normal erva of Achois Ishtoi, which automatically is exempt from Yibum and Chalitza, which means that Rachel is not Achois Kukasai, because Leah has no Zika to him. Leah is an erva to him, which will allow him to conclude, to finalize his Yibum with Rachel. However, Beis Hillel doesn't hold that
So
Maimer.
once you do Mimer, it's like she's no longer your Zika. Now she's
Very good.
married to you.
Very good. In other words, Beis Shammai holds that Maimer is very strong. We'll see how strong in the Gemara. Mamish like a marriage, like an Erusin, Midaraisa, or Midrabanan. It can all work in Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel, whatever Beis Shammai holds, Beis Hillel understands Maimer as weaker. And once the connection between Levi and Rachel is weaker, if that allows Leah to be somehow connected to him, then the whole thing becomes problematic. Beis Hillel beget ubechalitza. That even though Maimer was done when Shimon dies, Leah still has some type of zika to Levi, which makes Rachel achoiziku kasai, which means he has to cut off his relation to Rachel, and you can't minimize Maimer. Maimer did something. Rabbinically, Maimer affected enough of a link that now, if you don't want to be with her, you have to give her a get, but a get is not enough. Because if Maimer, which it is according to Beis Hillel, only midrabanan, which means midoraisa, nothing was done with Rachel. If nothing was done with Rachel, and you can't be with her, then what does Rachel need? Take Rab Shimon out. Chayziku kasei, there's a zika, but you can't finalize it, you need chalitza. So you have to give her both a get and chalitza, and ve'eshes achiv, and Leah, the other wife, the other widow, also has to get chalitza. Says the Mishnah, Zuhi Sha'amru. This was the case in which they said, Oi loy al ishtoi v'oi loy al ishes achiv. Like, what a pity on Rachel, what a pity on Leah. Like, it almost worked, but it didn't work. It almost worked because if before Shimon had passed away, if Levi would have finalized the mitzvah of Yibum with Rachel, then obviously there's no problem. He's married to Rachel. It was a mitzvah. Now that he's married to Rachel, Leah midoiraisa is achois ishtoi, and there's no problem with achois ukukasai. Okay, so first of all, the Gemara is gonna scrutinize the word zu. Zuhi sha'amru. Zuhi sha'amru means that according to other opinions, there are other cases where the Chachamim said oy loy on this and oy loy on that, and our Mishnah is saying no. The oy is only here. So let's see where might have there been another oy gewalt case that the Mishnah is saying that's not the case. Zuhi lemu'ute mai. So the Gemara says lemu'ute hach de Rabbi Yeshua. There is the din that we'll learn later, the Flametes, the din of Rabbi Yeshua, who has an argument both with Rabbi Gamliel and with Rabbi Eliezer, and our Tana does not hold with Rabbi Yeshua, and therefore the only oy case is our case. What is the case of Rabbi Yeshua? Very simple. We have two brothers, Her Ido. One brother married Rachel. Rachel is an adult, which means that the marriage to Rachel is a mido eiraisa dika marriage. The other brother, Shimon, married Leah. Leah was a minor. Minor meaning she's not 12. And as we explained many times, that there is a Torah dika marriage to a minor if her father marries her off. And then there are cases where the marriage of a katana is only midrabanan. And that's the case that we're speaking about. Either it was because she was an orphan, or even if her father is living, her father had already married her once, Leah, and she got divorced, and now Mido'eraisa, the father no longer has the right to marry her. Midrabanan, he does, and he did, Rachel. And now, what happened? Not three brothers, two brothers. Shimon is married to Leah, Midrabanan, and Reuven passes away. Says Rabbi Yeshua, so there are three opinions. We're only going to speak the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says this is a case where oy means like this. Shimon cannot stay connected midrabanan to his wife Leah. Why not? Because he has to do yibum with Rachel. Because since mido'iraisa he's not even married to Leah, so there's a din of yibum. On the other hand, he cannot do yibum with Rachel. Why not? Because midrabanan he's married to Leah, and midrabanan Rachel is achois ishtoi. So yibum he can't do with her, but he has to do chalitza. And now we do it in reverse.
Would that be considered what we said before, mitzvah or whatever, like where it's a Yisra Rabban, what the terminology?
Well, sometimes you could use the terminology mitzvah. Mitzvah l'shmei l'dei b'chachamim. Yeah. Very good. That's a shnei. Well, it's not. It wasn't counted in the shneias that we learned, but that's a case where midrabanan you can't be with her. Midrabanan there's an erva d'oraisa. Now let's go in reverse. Why can't Shimon stay with Leah? Shimon cannot stay with Leah because Leah is a chois zikukasai of Rachel. Was the katana. So even though they have a rabbinic marriage, midoraisa there is no marriage, and midoraisa there is. I'm sorry, she's a chois. Yeah, chois zikukasai. Exactly. Midoraisa, Rachel has a zika to him. So what is Leah? Leah is the sister of the woman with whom he has a zika. Midrabanan, he can be married with her, either already married, so he has to divorce her. So that's what Rabbi Yeshua says. Now, don't forget, Leah doesn't need chalitza. Leah needs a get midrabanan, and Rachel needs chalitza midrabanan. So that's what now we're going to learn later. What does Rabbi Gamliel and what does Rabbi Eliezer say? According to Rabbi Yeshua, that's also a case of, oi, what a pity. He can't be with one sister, can't be with the other. Our Mishnah does not hold of Rabbi Yeshua. So when our Mishnah spoke our case, where there were three brothers, and when one passed away, the living brother did only Maimer, and then the other passed away, according to Beis Hillel, this is the only case where you say, oi, and you can't be like it.
Our Mishnah says that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel would not agree with Rabbi Yeshua in this case of the
Lav dafka about Beis Shammai. Lav dafka about Beis Shammai would hold. Because don't forget, according to Beis Shammai, our case itself was also not an oi case. According to Beis Shammai, Levi stays married to Rachel. Okay, so that's that. Now let's move on. Now the whole remaining of the daf today, it's a good daf, is going to explain, according to Beis Shammai, what exactly is Maimer. Now whatever Maimer is to Beis Shammai, to Beis Hillel it's weaker. But there are many degrees of koyach, of Maimer, that we could understand in the opinion of Beis Shammai.
Explain Rabbi Yeshua about the Ketana. What is the
Go back.
status of a marriage of a Ketana?
A rabbinic marriage.
A rabbinic marriage.
That's it. Being that, let's say, there's no father, no one has the right to marry her off. But midrabanan, the older brother or the mother, right, the widowed mother, has the right to marry her for minor daughter.
And that's why she can do meals.
Well, no. That's being. It's only that's a not. Mean is not negaya.
Because it's a weaker marriage.
Correct, but that's not the point here. Correct. It's a marriage midrabanan, which means that Rachel is a choisishta midrabanan. On the other hand, Leah herself, the Ketana, is a choiziku kasoi. So therefore, you can't stay with either. Okay, let's go back to it. Amar Rabbi Elazar says Rabbi Elazar. This is Amayra. Elazar. Loi tema maimer lebeshamai koyena kinyan gomer. Don't understand that the leniency of Beis Shammai that allows the mufna, the single guy, Levi, who did maimer with Rachel, to stay with her, is only because maimer is mamash a marriage. If maimer lebeis Shammai would be a real marriage, then how would you sever maimer? Only with a get. If maimer is something but not a full, or only a midrabanan and not a midoraisa, then you need to have both a get and chalitza. So says Rabbi Elazar, when we learned the opinion of Beis Shammai, true, Beis Shammai says that the maimer that Levi did with Rachel is enough to allow him to marry her, and that automatically excluded Leah. That, yeah. But it doesn't have to be, because Beis Shammai holds that maimer with Rachel is mamash a marriage, which would then mean that she only needs a get. Ella, maybe even according to Beis Shammai, if Levi, who made maimer with Rachel, changes his mind and doesn't want to be with her, maybe according to Beis Shammai, maybe you need a get and chalitza. Nevertheless, Beis Shammai's din is a din in the Mishnah. It's not a contradiction. What is it effective for more than Beis Hillel? Interesting here, throughout the whole daf today, tzara doesn't always mean co-wife. Sometimes tzara will mean co-wife. Here, the word tzara means the sister. In other words, the maimer that the mufna did, 100% kosher, with Reuven's widow Rachel, was strong enough to make Leah not even be considered a choiziku kasei. Leah now is considered a choisishtoi. which is why she's an erva, which is why there's no zikah to her, which is why Rachel remains permitted on Levi. But you don't have to understand by Shammai that it only works out if he holds that Maimer is mamar to marriage. And that's good. That's one version of what Rabbi Elazar said. We'll learn later another version of what Rabbi Elazar said, and it's going to write a Agushlogan. This will be the statement of Rabbi Elazar. Now, Rabbi Elazar is going to try to find a raya, but the proof he won't have. So Amar Rav Avin says, Rav Avin, afanon amitanino, I'll prove it to you. How will I prove it to you? Because Beishamai, this is such a great proof. Chaval, it's great that it's not, but it's a good chab. In the case of this Pedic, the 4 brothers, 2 brothers married 2 sisters. Both died. No one did the mimer yet. Both died. Now you have 2 sisters that fell to Yibum to 2 brothers, which was the din of Achayzuku Kasei that we learned, not Rab Shimon, that each sister needs to get chalitza. No brother can do Yibum with neither of the sisters. What happens if they did it? And don't forget, we learned a little while back that once Yibum is done, it retroactively, or once Chalitza is done, it also retroactively nullifies the Zika that this widow had with the others. So one might have argued, if both brothers did Yibum, each one with another sister, maybe let them stay, which is what Beis Shammai said, but we paskin that they can't even stay together. But even Beis Shammai that was lenient, Beis Shammai was only lenient that if they performed Yibum, Yekaimu. So now Rav Avin says, I have a kasha, I have a proof to the din of Rabbi Elazar, because if not for the correctness of the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, I have a kasha on Beis Shammai. That Beis Shammai says that if they already did Yibum, Shaloikadin, against the rabbinic law, then Yikaimu in, which means Lechatchiloloi, turning the page. 1 second. You know what the Isra of Achayzik Kasa is, and this is good to remember every now and then, to remind ourselves of this din. Whenever there's a rabbinic prohibition, the prohibition is not on the marriage. The prohibition is that they're not allowed to be intimate together. Now, of course, Al Pi Din Torah, you can only be intimate if you get married. But they didn't prohibit the marriage. So he has a great question. If Maimer, according to Beis Shammai, would mean mamish, a marriage, Kaina Kinyan Gamur, so he says very simple. 2 brothers passed away. Let one living brother, Levi, do Maimer with Rachel. He didn't violate the rabbinic law yet. Let Yehuda do Maimer with Leah. Didn't violate anything. Now that they are Maimered with their Yevamos, if Beis Shammai holds that Maimer affects a real marriage, look at the Gavaldik Echad. Once they're married, then for Levi, if he's married to Rachel, what is Leah to Levi? Achay Sishtoi is an erva. Automatically there's no zika. If she doesn't have any connection to him, then Rachel now is no longer Achay Zikukasai. So now he can have a relation with her.
Say that again?
Gavaldik.
So now it can be equal.
Yeah. If
Wait, you're saying...
I'll repeat this again. Why wouldn't, when a person learns the Mishnah, and Beis Shammai says that now that Levi did Maimer to Rachel, he can marry her, the simple reading would be, according to Beis Shammai, Maimer is mamish marriage. So since he's already married to Rachel, everyone will agree that if Reuven dies, Shimon is still living, and Levi marries, does Yibum with Rachel, Kul Alma. Now if Shimon passes away, there's no problem at all by the fact that Levi is married to Rachel. Who cares? Rachel is not a chayzik ukasei. Rachel is his wife. What is Leah? To him an erva. Nothing. She's muteres l'shuk if there's 3 brothers because no yibam no chalitz. The challenge in our Mishnah was that there was maimer, but the Shami says still you can go through with the marriage. So Rabbi Elazar came in with a chiddush and he says Beis Shammai doesn't have to hold that maimer is mamash a full-fledged marriage. Maimer is not a full-fledged marriage. Nevertheless, Beis Shammai says what he says. Comes along Rav Avin and he says, Beis Shammai, it has to be that way. Because if, according to Beis Shammai, Maimer is a marriage, in the case of the 4 brothers and 2 sisters, based on this concept that all of these Isurim are not on the marriage, it's the Isur, you can't have a relation with her, in or out of marriage. But the Isur was not on the marriage, let one brother do Maimer. The moment he does Maimer according to Beis Shammai, he's married, if that would have been the din. Once he's married to her, what is the other sister? Achay Sishtoi. If she's Achay Sishtoi to Levi, she's no longer, there's no Zika. If there's no Zika between Leah and Levi, so then Rachel is no longer Achay Zikukasei.
Are you proposing this as a lachatchila solution?
Yes, I am not proposing. The Gemara is saying that the only reason why this is not done is only because even according to Beis Shammai, Maimer is not a full-fledged marriage.
How can you say to go do something lachatchila?
Be'isr. Good. That's the counter. That's the counter. But this is still a good chap. Okay. So Yasa zeh Maimer v'yikna. V'zeh Yasa Maimer v'yikna. Elamai. Okay. So finished. V'yikna. Is araya that Rab Lazar is right? Counters the Gemara. It's not correct.
Just go do Yibam. That's what Beis Shammai says. If they do Yibam,
Stop. No, Beis Shammai says that. You're not going to tell a person to do a Isser. But okay, the Gemara counters better.
Beis Shammai right now. That's what we're talking about.
It counters the Gemara. Elamai. Okay, so according to Beis Shammai, Maimer is not a full-fledged marriage. But what is Maimer in our Mishnah? What did the Maimer do? That once Levi did Maimer to Rachel, it was Doicha Leah. So let it be Doicha here also. Even if it's not a full-fledged marriage, it's Doicha. So why didn't you propose the same solution? And the answer would be basically what you're saying, Danny, that in our Mishnah he did it beheter. When Reuven passed away, there was only one widow. There's only Rachel. Levi has a mitzvah. He did the mitzvah. He did it mamash good, even according to the rabbinic law. He did Maimer. So there the Maimer has a greater effect. But when Maimer is done Isur, why would it have an effect? Let's read it inside. Elamai doicheh gemura, which is what our Mishnah says. Still I can ask, Ze Maimer, Ze Yasa Maimer v'yitcha, V'ze Yasa Maimer v'yitcha, Elamai, you have to answer, Ma'is l'chol Maimer, Maimer dehetera dachi. In our Mishnah, when Reuven died, Shimon was still living. There was no Achayzikul Kasa yet. And therefore, Beis Shammai says, since he did something beheter, could be Rab Lazar is right, whether it's a full-fledged marriage according to Beis Shammai, whether it's enough of a marriage to completely be doicha the zik of Leah later, that's because the Maimer was done beheter. But the Isura, but when you had four brothers and both of them are now Achayzikul Kasa, into which the rabbi says don't have a relation, if you're not allowed to have a relation, what are you doing Maimer for? What are you getting married for? This is a build-up to our relation. And if the rabbi says don't do it, then the Maimer has less of an effect. It's always going to have an effect that you have to give a get. But it has less of an effect, which is why you can't call it a lechatchila. What you're saying?
So the zika is stronger than the maimer if the maimer is illegal.
The zika remains stronger if the maimer was done illegal. Exactly. The yisur leidach hakinami maimer, and therefore you can even argue. I mean, that's not what Rabbi Lazar is saying. That even if Beis Shammai were to hold that Maimer Mamish does marriage, you can say the same thing. When does Maimer do marriage, Mamish marriage? If it was done beheter. But if it was done be'isur, then Maimer doesn't do marriage. Let's just read this inside. Achinami Maimer afilu lamandam Maimer koiniki and gomor is only when it's Maimer dehetera kani. But the isur leikani. Now this didn't slug up Rabbi Lazar. There's no proof. Okay, so the first opinion, let's just chap halt kop. Rabbi Lazar is saying that even according to Beis Shammai, Maimer is not a king and gomer. All Beis Shammai says, Maimer affects that Leah will be completely out of the picture, which will allow Rachel to remain permitted to Levi to the Mufna. Weiter. One version. Next version. Let's move on. Ravashi Masni Hachi. Ravashi had a different version in what Rabbi Elazar said. Rabbi Elazar said, Loi Teima Maimer Beis Shammai Dachi Dichia Gemura. Don't learn pshat, even a bigger chiddush. Forget about Maimer is not a marriage, for sure not. Even according to Beis Shammai, Maimer doesn't completely push away Leah. That also not. For you to think that Levi doesn't even need to do chalitza with Leah, he needs to do chalitza with Leah. All Beis Shammai is saying is that he can go through with the marriage with Rachel, because he did Maimer with her.
Right.
After chalitza.
After chalitza.
After chalitza.
Otherwise, it's a zika.
Yes.
Right?
Well, correct. Well, I don't know if it has to be done after chalitza. I'm not clear about that. The point he's saying is that for Leah to marry someone else, she has to get chalitza from. I'll tell you why I'm hesitating. When Leah wants to marry someone else, if she won't get chalitza from Levi, that's a Yevamos l'shuk. That's a Isser midrabanan. Why am I hesitating chalitza? Because there's another Isser midrabanan called achos chalutzasai. But it won't be a problem according to Beis Shammai, because when did the rabbis prohibit achos chalutzasai? When you didn't begin Maimer with her. Here you did Maimer. In other words, we're constantly trying to make Beis Shammai closer to Beis Hillel. Still, he can argue. Now this is not correct. The Gemara is going. Beis Shammai could not have held that opinion that the other one needs chalitza. Why not? So the Gemara, Rav Avin now try to prove it. Afana nami tanina, same thing. That Beis Shammai says in the case of the 4 brothers and the 2 sisters, yikaimu, which means only if they did yibum shaloi kedin, then in. But lechatchiladai, right, the same proof and the same agish. If according to Beis Shammai, even after you did maimer, if you did maimer, the other sister doesn't even need chalitza. It's a full dechion. So izeh yasa maimer v'yitcha, v'zeh yasa maimer v'yitcha. So why didn't Beis Shammai say do maimer? So the Gemara counters ve'elom. 1 second. Read the Mishnah. What does it say in our Mishnah, the words? It says in our Mishnah, the words. It says, Beis Shammai oimrim ishtay imay. The case of our Mishnah, that Levi, who did maimer with Rachel, stays with Rachel, and the words is, v'halozu teitzei mishum achayis isha. Chavra, achayis isha doesn't need chalitza. So Beis Shammai is clearly saying that the other one, at least the Chia Gemura there is. The Ela, Yevama, the Chazia, Lekulu, Chazia, Lemiksasa. Yevama, the Loi, Chazia, Lekulu, Lechazia, Lemiksasa. The contradiction with the 4 brothers and the 2 sisters, and on the same answer. Over there, you're not allowed to do it. Which is why Beis Shammai did not even suggest to do Maimer. But in our Mishnah, Maimer was done behetera. When Maimer is done behetera, then at least, and that's how we're going to hold. No, there's still a chiddush of Rabbi Elazar. One could have learned Beis Shammai holds Maimer is marriage. Says Rabbi Elazar, you don't need to learn that in Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai can still say what he says. You can stay with Rachel and Halozu Teitzei. It's Maimer is enough to be Doichet D'chia Gemura. Period. Let's move on. It's it's easy. Compared to what we're learning, this is mamash a walk in the park today. Boy, Rabba asked the following question, and the Gemara is going to clarify the question. Maimer leBeis Shammai nesuyin oisa or erisin oisa. Okay, let's put Rabbi Elazar on the shelf. We're going to bring it back in a second. Don't worry. But the Rabba came along and he said the following. One thing is clear, according to Beis Shammai, unlike Beis Hillel, Maimer really does something. And let's learn right now that we are certain that Beis Shammai holds that Maimer is midrabanan. If you remember, we learned already twice before that there's a Tana Rab Shimon that has a doubt what Maimer is. He doesn't know if Maimer is a Do'eraisa or if Maimer is nothing. And because of it being a suffix midoraisa, there's other consequences. But let's go to Beis Shammai. According to Beis Shammai, there's no suffix here. Beis Shammai says that Levi gets to stay with Rachel. With Rachel.
Calls him Ishtoi.
Ishtoi, good. So the question is it Ishtoi as an Arusa or is an Ishtoi as an Asuya? As we said many times, Midoi Raisa, when we marry a wife, the way we marry a wife by Torah law is by 2 steps. The first step is called Erusin or called Kiddushin, which means engagement, not the engagement that we say today, but a Torah-dik engagement. That is done by giving her something of value. It's not the only way, but that's the way we do it today. We give a woman something of value and we say, Harei at Mikodeshes li. If it's a ring, Betabazu Kadash Moshe v'Yisrael. And then there's a next phase, which is her entering the chuppah. Which, as we said, machlokes, is it going under the chuppah, makes the nesuyin? Is it the yichud that makes the nesuyin? Is it the actual relation that makes the nesuyin? We do all 3, and we effect nesuyin. So the question is, according to Beis Shammai, is it nesuyin or erusin oisem? And Abaye right away asked Rabba to clarify, l'may nafka mina, like, where exactly is your question? Regarding what law will there be a difference? L'may hilchasa. If you are asking whether if she died, will he inherit her? Well, let me tell you something. By a normal marriage, not by Yibum, when a man marries a woman, if he only did Kiddushin and not Nasuyin, and then she passes away, the husband does not inherit her. The din of inheritance only begins after Nasuyin. If it is the din for him becoming Tamei, a Kohen normally cannot become Tamei. 2 people. The exception is the 7 relatives, including She'eroi, his wife. When could a Kohen become Tamei to his wife? Only after Nesuin. Is it for this case? In other words, so here the question would be that if he's a Kohen and he did Maimer with his Yevama and then she died, could he become Tamei to her? That depends what Maimer is. Is it Lohafer Nidoreo? there's a din that a woman who is married, if she makes a vow, we'll learn this in Masechtas Nedarim, this doesn't necessarily, according to everyone, refer to any vow she makes, but certainly a vow that will affect her relationship with her husband. Is a vow that Hashem gives the husband the power to retroactively nullify it, to do hafaras nedarim on the day that he heard it. Now, if he hears it and the day goes by and he doesn't say, I nullify it, then the vow stands. But the man has the power to be made for nedarim. When can the husband do it by himself? Only after marriage. So the Gemara says, Abai is telling Rabbah, what are you asking? You want to know if Maimer can give him the power of what we just mentioned? Hashta arusa ba'alma. When it comes to a Torah dikim engagement, Tani Rabchia, and before we read it inside, which is what we said outside, that a engaged husband cannot do any of the above to her, Maimer, according to Rabbah's understanding and according to Abai's understanding, is only midrabanan. So it can't be that an act that only has a rabbinic power should affect more than a Torah dike arusa act. You can argue that, and we'll argue that in a moment. You can say that it's only midrabanan, but midrabanan she becomes married. But his question is that if an arusa, which is a doiraisa dike thing, a woman who's engaged midoraisa is not connected enough to allow her husband to inherit from her, to become tamei to her, to be made for her nadarim, then maimer for sure would not affect it. And as we learned, Tana Rabchia, that ishtay arusa, that if a man is engaged midoraisa, nevertheless loy oinein, if she dies, there is no din of mourning called aninus. And if the husband is a kohen v'loy metamalo, cannot become tamei by her burial. V'chein here, or the opposite, if he passes away while they were only engaged, midoraisa engaged, is loy oinenes, she does not mourn for him, not even the aninu stage of mourning, and v'loy metamas loy, if she is a bas kohen, she doesn't become tummy to him. Mesa, if she dies, if they would have been married, mida oiraisa, the husband inherits his wife. But eino yarsha, now you can put this in parentheses. Meis hu goivek suvasa. There is one thing that engagement affects, and this is something that's halacha lamaisa today. The ksuba needs to be given before the nesuyin. For a man to be married to his wife, there needs to be a ksuba. And arusa does not need a ksuba. But if a husband decides to give his wife, who's just an arusa, ksuba, then the ksuba goes into effect. It's a monetary document. So if there was an erusin and there was already a ksuba, that's an exception. There we say that if he dies, she will collect the ksuba. Which is, by the way, today, why the ksuba, especially Minig Chabad, we don't write the ksuba under the chuppah. We write the ksuba, we don't write it a month before the wedding, but we write it normally the day before the wedding, because many people get married after dark, and the ksuba is written during the day of the marriage, which is a different halachic day. And ironically, many times we write a ksuba before we write a tanoim. Minig Chabad is that during what we call the engagement, we don't write the document of engagement. We only break a plate. When do we write the tanoim? The day of the wedding. It's very common by us that we write that the rabbi resolves or signs the ksuba before the tanaim is signed. It doesn't matter. Machna shois. No, it's ksuba can be given before.
Which day do they put? They put that day or they put
They have to put a day. They have to today. Today by us now is Hey Mar Cheshvan. So if a couple will get married tonight, which is Vav, then the ksuba they would write Hey. If they would write it today, they would write Hey. They have to write it today. It has to do when the kinyan was made. If the kinyan is made today, then they have to write in it, hey, let's go on over here. Even though they read it under the chupan vav, and they'll read behei, absolutely. However, so it says, Abaya Teraba, if a do'iraisidik engagement, let's finish this, doesn't affect enough bond for these dinim, is avad b'maimer mibayim. Don't forget, maimer is only midrabanan. So says the Gemara, the Ella, so now we clarify, why, for what, L'may nafkamina is maimer, according to Beishamai, engagement or marriage, le'inyan mesira l'chuppah. Now here you have to take the words out of its literal meaning. Whether chuppah is needed or not, it means the following. Marriage has to be done midoiraisa with the consent of both the man and the woman. So whenever we use the words, a woman is going to her chuppah, it means she is going into her chuppah. A man cannot force a chuppah on a woman. Yibum, we learned that if a woman falls to Yibum, if the brother, God forbid, But if against her will he has a relation with her, she becomes his wife. The act of Yibum could be done against her will. So the question is, if a man gave the Yevama Maimer, what did Beis Shammai mean? That Maimer affected a connection. Is it a connection to the point that now he can have a relation with her even against her will? In other words, you don't need Mesida L'chuppah, or Maimer doesn't affect that. Maimer needed her consent, and now having a relation with her would need her consent. The Gemara asks a question: if even without Maimer, the relation can be against her will, why would Maimer change it? So the Gemara says, could be it changes it. Maybe when you just do Yibum, the Torah says Yibum can be done against the will. But now that they added Midrabanan the step of Maimer, and Maimer already affects a different type of connection, maybe after Maimer is done, now the relation that he will have with her also has to be done with her will, and if it was done, God forbid, against her desire, it didn't do anything. That was his question. We're clarifying what the question was. Let's read it inside. Do we say Nisuyin Oisa, that Maimer is like Nisuyin, so they're already married? And if they are already married, so then Loi Boy Mesida L'chuppah. Then if he has a relation with her against her will, she is his full-fledged wife. That Maimer only does Eidosin, and therefore when they will be together, it has to be done with her consent. So the Gemara counters, if Maimer is not bun, and it says in the pasuk Yevama Yavai Aleha, the wordings of the pasuk, we said the word Aleha with an ayin, we had this before, not Aleha. Aleha implies even against the will. He came on her, not with her. Balkarcha, that Yibum can be done Balkarcha, and God forbid, we're not suggesting it should be done, God forbid, but if it was done against the will, it had its effect. So Ava B'Maimer Mibaya, so the Gemara says, yeah, the moment Maimer was done, maybe Parcha Mimenu Zikas Yevanim, maybe the normal Yibum connection is gone, because he did Maimer, and if the normal Yibum connection is gone, so the leniency of him being allowed to do the act of Yibum against the will also goes away. And and now, if she's like any other engaged wife, a man has a relation with his engaged wife, by Nesuyin, by a normal Nesuyin, it cannot be an act against the will. So that is the meaning of his question. It's amazing that the Gemara now is going to give a proof to resolve the question, and we're going to go back to what was a given that it's wrong. In other words, as a given, he cannot be made for her Nadarim. As a given, he cannot be Matama to her. And now we're going to prove that he could. Tashema, it says the following in the Darim. Shemeres Yavam, if there's a woman, whether she's a widow only to one Yavam. So Reuven is married to Rachel, Reuven died, there's only a Shimon. Whether there was a Shimon and a Levi, ben Shnei Yavamim, and she makes a vow, question is, does the Yavam have or not have the power to be Meifed her Nadarim? And we have a few options. And every option is another opinion. Rabbi Eliezer says, Yafer. Yafer means either one could nullify her vows. Not both. Shimon himself can do it. Levi himself can do it. Why? Because she has a zika to both brothers, each brother separately, so each one can act like the husband acts. Rabbi Yeshua says, Le'echad v'loy l'shnayim. Rabbi Yeshua holds, if she's a widow and there's only one living brother, the zika to him is obviously stronger, it's going to be him. Even if chalitza, it's going to be him doing chalitza. So before he does chalitza, even though he didn't do yibum, he has the power to nullify her vows. But if she falls to two brothers, neither of them can do it. There we're going to learn Masechtas Nadarim. Why can't they both do it together? Those details we'll leave for Masechtas Nadarim. Rabbi Kiva Omer lo ilechad v'lo l'shnayim. No one can do it. Even if there's only one living brother, he also cannot be made for the Nadarim and Vahavinim, but we have to understand the following. According to Rabbi Akiva, obviously, why does Rabbi Akiva say that even if there's only one Yavam, he cannot be made for the Neder? Because he holds Ein Zika. Afilu Lachad. According to Rabbi Yeshua, we can explain to Rabbi Yeshua, Lachad, when there's only one brother, he's for sure the one who needs to do either Yibum or Chalitza, Lachad Yesh Zika. Whenever the two brothers, there's no zika to neither of them, it's weakened. So therefore, neither of them can do it. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, which Rabbi Eliezer says either one can do it, which means what does he hold? Yesh zika, the kosav yesh zika, bishleim elachad mefer. Elo l'treid. Why does Rabbi Eliezer say that one can do it? Why don't you say, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that both should have to do it together? Amai, can either one do it? Both, you should need both. And on this answers Rav Ami, we'll skip the parentheses. The case of Rabbi Eliezer would be that this one already did Maimer. Now it makes sense. He did Maimer. And he'll hold like Beis Shammai that says, now look at the words here, Maimer koine kinyan gamur. See, now we're going to have a challenge between what Rav Ami is saying here and the first part of today's shir, which was Rabbi Elazar, who was Dafka not saying that in Beis Shammai. But let's go on of it. That according to Beis Shammai, who holds that Maimer is mamash a kinyan gamur. So the one who did Maimer is mamash married to her. And therefore he can be made for the neder. So before we go into Rabbi Elazar, what did we just explain right now? What was the given? That Rabba's question, even if Maimer is a marriage, he can't be made for the neder. Here clearly we're learning that according to the Tana Rabbi Eliezer, the way Rav Ami explained him, the husband who did Maimer has the power to be made for Shonadarim. Which means Maimer Kanya Kinyan Gomer, according to Beis Shammai. Perfect. If Maimer is mamash a marriage, that's why Mefer, a husband who has Nesuyin, has the power to be Mefer, the Nadarim of his wife. If it's only Erusin.
Can you be stronger than Erusin, but not as strong as
No, we'll have a better solution. A husband who is biblically engaged to his wife cannot yet do hafara by himself. We learned in the Mishnah, not amurasa. Yet the husband who is the engaged husband has a certain power, but he cannot do it by himself. It's him and her father. Answers the Gemara, that what does Rabbi Eliezer mean by Mefer? Mefer will mean, let's go back, like Rav Ami answered. When does Rabbi Eliezer hold one husband can do it? If he did Maimer. And even after he did Maimer, it's not that he can be Mefer by himself. He can be Mefer with her father. My Mefer b'shutvas, him with the father. So we're good. So now the Gemara asks, 1 second, all this is good if Maimer is Kanya, King and Gomer. But what about the Rabbi Eliezer, who we began today's share with, that says that Maimer Beis Shammai eino koina elo litchais litzara, the sister Bilvad. So let's go back. How will we explain Rabbi Eliezer? Even if one brother did Maimer, if Maimer is not Kanya, King and Gomer, even according to Beis Shammai, why would he have the power to be made for B'shutfis when there's another brother involved here? His Maimer didn't fully marry him to her. Amalach Rabbi Elazar will explain Rabbi Elazar, who stands by his explanation of Beis Shammai. What did I mean by that? Like I explained, it's not a full marriage, meaning that what happens if Levi doesn't want to stay with Rachel? What does he need with her? According to Rabbi Elazar, there is no real marriage. There's no full marriage, even according to Beis Shammai. And therefore, he will not only have to give her a get, because he gave her Maimer, he will also have to give to Rachel Chalitza. That, Ella by Chalitza. He will also have to give her Chalitza aside of the get.
Who says that?
Rabbi Elazar. However, he will have the power to be made for her Nidarim.
Beis Shammai holds that you don't have to do chalitza.
No. Beis Shammai holds that Leah doesn't need Chalitza. Talking about Rachel now. So we're finding a place where Maimer is and Maimer is not. So Rabbi Elazar still stands his ground. It's not a contradiction to him. That even according to Beis Shammai, Maimer is not a full marriage. However, still you can explain Rabbi Eliezer, who is speaking about a case only where one of the two brothers did Maimer, and that Maimer makes him the only brother that has the power to do Hafaras Nadarim with the father, but he could do Hafaras Nadarim. V'i ba'yisema, Amalach Rabbi Elazar, I'll give you another explanation, that Ul Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, you Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, right, who you were explaining Mefer B'Shutfes, Your answer of Mefer B'Shutfus is not a good answer. You know what Rabbi Eliezer said? Rabbi Eliezer said the words Yafer. You know what Yafer means? Yafer is Lashon Yachid. So Taka, if you want to explain that he only holds it if one gave Maimer, but if he gave Maimer, he can do it by himself. How can you say with the father, Minicha, Miktana Yaferu? Does it say that Rabbi Eliezer holds? I mean, the whole thing is a doichi. It's only if one brother gave Maimer. And even there, they nullify it. It doesn't say they, it says Yafer Ktani. And we must answer the case of Rabbi Eliezer the following. This is a good answer. And that is, Sha'amdu Badin. And Upasko Lam Zainis, Mishalai, Uchad Rav Pinchas, Mishmeid Rava. What did Rav Pinchas teach in the name of Rava? In a normal case, whenever there's a Yavam and a Yevama, and the man, the Yavam, didn't do Yibum yet, he didn't do Chalitzi yet, the woman is telling her, here's a chaim, make up your mind. And it came to a point where she took him to a Beis Din, and Beis Din has the right to tell him, before you do the next step, in the meanwhile, give her Mezainis. When she falls to Yibum, the living Yavam or the living Yavams don't have to give her Mezainis. But if she took them to a Din Torah and she's putting pressure on them and they didn't yet do one or the other, Beis Din has the right to obligate the Yavam to give Mezainis. Now, once the Beis Din obligates the Yavam to give Mezainis, now there's another hold-in. The reason why did the Torah say that a woman who's only engaged, the engaged husband, cannot be made for her Nadarim by himself? But a married husband has the power to nullify his wife's vows. Why is that? It's not a Gzeras HaKosov. It's because when a woman is being supported by a man, when she makes a vow, lechatchila, she takes into account, he's supporting me. If he will not agree to my neder, then I'm not making it. It's already built into her mind. So the reason why a married man has the right, the exclusive right, to be made for the nedarim of his wife is only because he's mechoiv mezainis. Based on that, even if there is no real nesuyin, in a case where the Beis Din obligated the Yavam to support his wife, he alone will have the right, the power to do afaras nedarim. So the reason why Rabbi Eliezer will hold that either of the husbands Yafid is not in a case where one husband gave her Maimer. Whether he gave Maimer or not, it has to be explained where the Beis Din, for whatever reason, picked on one of the brothers and says, it's you. Do Yibam or do Chalitz, and until you do that, give her Mezainis. Let's read it inside. The reason why Hashem gave the power to a married man, it's not because he's married, it's because whoever makes a vow, al das baile hinoi, that is because he gives her Mezainis. Therefore, over here, Yafer.
So if she is responsible for her own, if she takes care of her own parnasa and she makes money, because you don't have the...
Okay, so let's leave this with a question. It's a good question. According to this opinion, here we're saying that Dorshin and Tama Dekra, we learned it with Rab Shimon, that if the reason why the husband can be made for her neder is only because she's being supported by him, I'll look into God willing tomorrow. So the question Yonatan is asking, what about if today there's an agreement in a marriage which is acceptable, that she tells the husband, you don't support me, and I keep Masi Yadai, I keep my own salary, and if they come to that agreement, that's okay. Does he have the power to be made for neder according to Rav Pinchas? I'll look into that. I don't know if this is the halacha. But in conclusion, that today we learned about Maimer. Just to know that by Hasidim, the word Maimer is used by Hasidic discourse. And for sure, by the Hasidic Maimer, that not only does it connect us be'erusin, it connects us benesuyin. There's no greater revelation of godliness today than a Rebbe saying a Maimer. So we'll stop here. We'll continue, God willing, tomorrow.